Welcome back to Movies TV Mad, and welcome to Thursday's edition of the Movies TV Mad Daily. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. It's all kicked off again. Do you remember when Martin Scorsese 2 years ago was asked about the MCU and the state of the entertainment industry? He literally called the MCU a Disney park amusement ride and really went into it and went for it. In fact, he even did an article for the New York Times. And if I remember rightly, I read it out on this very channel. For some reason, a journalist asked James Gunn during the promotion of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad what he thought of Scorsese's comments. And James Gunn, stupidly, as much as I love him and I love his films, came out and spoke about this, and the internet isn't happy. We're going to read out what he said, and then I'm going to tell you what I think of all of this. James Gunn calls Martin Scorsese's criticism of Marvel films awful cynical, even though he does agree somewhat. How can it be cynical if you agree with it, James? Make your mind up, mate. It's like you're playing both sides here, because your audience is one side, which will be not agreeing with Martin Scorsese because they're MCU stans, and the filmmaker side of you knows he's fucking right. First, it needs to be said that a lot of time has passed since Martin Scorsese took aim at Marvel Studios and superhero films, basically calling them trash and not real cinema. So perhaps in that time Scorsese binged all of the MCU films and is anxiously awaiting Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, but I doubt it. In September, but he hasn't said anything about that yet. So when James Gunn was recently asked about those controversial Marvel comments made by the legendary director, he talked openly and honestly about what he thinks motivated them. Talking to the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, James Gunn was asked about the Martin Scorsese comments, and being a person that has made a number of superhero films, 2 for Marvel Studios, 1 for DC Films, and even an indie one with Super, Gunn doesn't fully agree with Scorsese at all. Now there's a surprise. I just think it seems awful cynical that he would keep coming out against Marvel, and then that is the only thing that would get him pressed for his movie. Or maybe, James, and no one's actually spoken about this, but maybe, James, you're the one who asked for this question to be asked, so you could get some hype for your movie. Let me tell you something, James. Martin Scorsese doesn't need to add Marvel to the conversation to get people to watch his movies. But maybe you may need to mention the name Martin Scorsese to get more people to talk about your film. What was one of the, defining reasons the Joker movie, not the biggest one, but one of the reasons Joker movie made over $1 billion? Because everyone told people not to go and see it. What happens when you tell a child not to do something? They still do it all the more. So, at the end of the day, we know this film is projected for about a 30 million gross domestic box office weekend, which isn't huge. And obviously already we got sites, publications like Variety making those excuses. That is not a good overall weekend domestically, and you can't blame COVID for that. No, nothing has changed since the opening week of Black Widow. That film nearly did 100 million without Disney Plus Premier Access. Forget what happened in the second week. This film, I don't care if it's R-rated, should do near that amount in its opening weekend. And if it doesn't, there's an issue. There's an issue. Said Gunn. So he just kept coming out against Marvel so that he could get press for his movie. First of all, that is so disrespectful, and that's ignoring the valid points Martin made. He's creating his movie in the shadow of the Marvel films. No. Martin Scorsese's content isn't in the shadow of any shit from the modern era, James. You're talking nonsense. So he uses that to get attention for something he wasn't getting as much attention as he wanted for it. I think you're wrong, James. I think people give Martin Scorsese enough attention. But that doesn't mean James Gunn is the #1 anti-Martin Scorsese person in the world. In fact, he's a big fan and thinks the legendary filmmaker's words about blockbusters hold some merit. You can't say the guy's cynical, then say hold some merit. No. Listen to me, right? I love franchises. I love comic book movies. You know I love the DCEU. I love Star Wars. I've never seen the Fast and the Furious franchise, but people love it, right? John Wick is awesome. I love franchises, but there's no question about it. What Martin said was bang on. What Matt Damon said was bang on. We are putting our industry at risk by milking these franchises dry and not giving the consumer variety. He's one of the greatest filmmakers who's ever existed, explained Gunn. I love his movies. I can watch his movies with no problem. And he said a lot of things I agree with. There are a lot of things that are true about what he said. Yeah, everything he said was true. He added there are a lot of heartless, soulless spectacle films out there that don't reflect what should be happening. I can't tell you the amount of times I've talked to film directors before they went and made a big movie and said, hey, we're in this together. Let's do something different with these big movies. Let's make them something different than everything that has come before them. And then see them cater to every single studio whim and be grossed out, frankly. Now, this is interesting by Gunn. This is what's so weird about the whole situation. He literally agrees with what Martin Scorsese is saying. Let me reread that again. Times I've talked to film directors before, they went and made a big movie and said, hey, we're in this together, let's do something different with these big movies, let's make them something different than everything that has come before them, and then see them cater to every single studio whim and be grossed out, frankly. Now this is interesting, isn't it? Now this goes back to Zack Snyder. Now I've criticised Zack Snyder for not meeting the studio halfway with WB and the DCEU. But somewhat it shows you that Zack Snyder actually said, fuck you, I'm not making this fairground ride, I'm going to do my own thing. And in 3 movies, first one, him, Chris Nolan and David Goyer did that, and he did that in the other 2. So respect in that sense to Zack Snyder. Ultimately though, he agrees with some of what Scorsese said. Gunn admits to the comments being irritating because the filmmaker has yet to see any of the Guardians of the Galaxy films and can't really speak to them. Obviously the comments made by Scorsese years ago now, have been debated time after time. Many people agree with his thoughts about real cinema versus Hollywood blockbuster garbage, while others like Gunn think it was a gross generalisation that paints with too wide a brush. Maybe Scorsese can go watch Gunn's The Suicide Squad when it debuts in theatres and HBO Max on August the 6th. Now Josh Horowitz, which is the guy who asked these questions, some very honest thoughts here from James Gunn on defending comic book movies from the likes of Martin Scorsese. Yikes. You asked the question, you said you weren't trying to create a war between Martin and James, but Josh, Mr. Horowitz, that's exactly what you were attempting to fucking do. So congratulations for putting James in bad light, because a lot of what James said was good in this interview. Some of it I thought was, let's say, misplaced. He would have been better served keeping his mouth shut. This is the problem with James. He's not just a great writer-director, he's a showman. And if you ask him something, he's going to answer you honestly from his point of view. That can become a problem. It's become a problem now because this could potentially put off Martin Scorsese fans and cinema purists from going to see his film. This wasn't a good idea, and he's had to dial back on these things, and it's not going to work now. The damage is done. Thrilled at last to have James Gunn on the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast. This one covers a ton. Great chat about his awesome new film and much more. And there it is. I want to talk about Robert Downey Jr. and bring him into this conversation, because as soon as Martin Scorsese made these comments, he was on the Howard Stern podcast, and I think if you're addicted to TikTok like I am, that interview always comes up. And Robert Downey Jr. said this, and this shows you how classy Robert Downey Jr. is. He says, Martin Scorsese has earned the right to say whatever he wants about anybody's films. And it's difficult for Robert Downey Jr. because I think at that time he was still kind of involved in the MCU. but he probably agrees because he comes from another era and a generation of movie making. Now, Matt Damon made some very strong comments the other day. This is what's kicked this thing off again. Matt Damon said anyone could have played Iron Man. I think we discussed it on one of my Movies TV Mad Daily shows. And he said anyone could have played him. The era of the movie star is dead, which is a bad thing. And we have no variety in the industry. And that's true. Now, James Gunn literally agrees with Martin Scorsese. He does. But he hasn't really said anything too bad, apart from saying that Martin used it to get some attention onto his content. Now, that may hold some truth, I don't know. But again, James could be doing the same thing, talking about Martin Scorsese to get attention to his film that's only projected to make 30 million in this opening weekend, which isn't good. I think it will make slightly more. Who knows? We're going to have to wait and see. We will evaluate. We will evaluate this. I really want to go and re-watch The Suicide Squad either today or tomorrow. But as you know, I look after my disabled father. It's very difficult. So I may have to just kind of do my review on one viewing, which is a shame. And that's kind of depressing for me. Anyway, so this issue is simple for me. Matt Damon and Martin Scorsese are dead right about this industry, because how long can we carry on milking the franchise cash cow? Now, when I grew up, we had blockbusters, we did, and there was the same conversations. Arnold Schwarzenegger's films by, people like Scorsese was still deemed to be crap, and I was a big fan of Arnie's movies, but they were shit. Not all of them. I mean, Total Recall and The Running Man are actually really good films that actually ask deep questions about our future and about, the human position and how we have hate in our hearts and what we do via technology. So they're really good films. And I think Arnie, he's not a good actor, but I think he did pretty well in those films. So there's a couple of good ones there. Terminator 2 is a really good film, but they're not Martin Scorsese. They're not, they're not Goodfellas or something like that. But if you like blockbusters, they're really, really cool. So there was the same discussions back then. There was, I think it was worse back then. I think there's more talent and, more industrious kind of talent put into comic book movies today than Arnie's movies, Van Damme's movies, Steven Seagal's movies. Most of those movies were shit. So we must be careful here. But again, we must be careful, because let's look where that led us. Where did that lead us? I mean, as I say, I think that's worse, what was being done with these muscle men back then. Because most of their movies were shit. Even though we watched them and enjoyed them and looked up to these powerful macho men, at the end of the day, their movies were shit. And they could have led the industry into a very dangerous climax. Bankruptcy. So what have we got now? We've got the franchise. Now, a lot of the movies we see today, and I've told you before, are very underwhelming. You watch them once and you don't watch them again. At least with the Arnie movies and the Van Damme movies and the Steven Seagal movies, I suppose, you could say that they were actually classics and you could re-watch them. Not classics in a filmmaking sense, but in an entertainment sense. The Running Man and Total Recall are classics after all. RoboCop is a blockbuster. But look at the statement that makes, and look where we are today. When we see those kind of weird offshoots of TV adverts and things, we're pretty close to that. Demolition Man is a silly little blockbuster, but look where we are. Cocteau constructs a machine. Every time you swear, you get fined a certain amount of credits. They use the technology of seashells to wipe their backsides. You can't say things. There's certain things you can't say or you get fined. A bit like now, right, when you're on Twitter, there's certain things you can't say. That's where we're heading to. So there was a lot of good films back then, making interesting statements, better statements than we're getting now. But in terms of the films today that are seen as trash by filmmakers and actors like Matt Damon, their issue is this, right? I've told you that the 80s stuff with the, the macho men it was even worse than the kind of franchise stuff, because we're comparing blockbusters, right? But then you look at a blockbuster like Titanic. Come on, a class movie. JFK wasn't a blockbuster, but what a movie. But anyway, I would say there was a lot of good stuff when I was growing up. What we had when I was growing up, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, is variety. But we have a situation now with these superhero blockbusters, and I think James Gunn said it himself, that some of them are just not taking any risks. They're all the fucking same. And he's mainly talking about Marvel. He's got the same issues with Marvel as Scorsese has. That's the weird thing about this, and even Robert Downey Jr. Because even I'll say this in a minute when we go on to the Scarlett Johansson situation. But, so it's interesting that James has got a lot of hate for this, because I think the only thing I don't agree with, him saying that Martin Scorsese was just trying to get attention for his picture, whatever it was. I think it was The Irishman on Netflix. Whatever, right? The point being, what Scorsese said was bang on. And it doesn't matter how much I love these movies, because I do. But just having these movies with no variety, with A Few Good Men, no Goodfellas, no A Perfect World, I could go on and on and on. You know, we had a variety when I was growing up. We don't have the variety. It's one franchise movie after the other. We've got a James Bond film in October, a couple of months' time. And then we've got the other issue of politicians making movies now. Extremists making movies now. It's fashionable to try and take down the white man now, or erase the white man. This is another threat coming into the entertainment industry, but it's a different subject. This industry is, the English-speaking entertainment industry is heading into meltdown. And in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we will be watching foreign movies with subtitles. Now, I don't have any issues with that, because I think they're superior movies. And when we talk about representation and inclusion, you go and look at your French movies, all the foreign movies. How much inclusion and representation do those films make? They will represent, listen, right, black people who are born and bred in a certain country are from that country. And if their actors have every right, if they're good enough, to be cast or direct or anything, right? So if you're Latino, but you're actually an American, right? But you've got Latino heritage, but you're actually American. You have every right to go for an audition, and if you're talented enough, get cast. I have no issue with that. But what we're going through now, we have representation and inclusion departments in studios and TV networks. That's an issue, because they're purposely casting the inclusive choice rather than the best choice. And this is the dangerous kind of way we're heading now. Now, just to close this off, the state of the industry and all of that, what James Gunn said, if you read it, is pretty cool. And he agrees with Martin Scorsese. He's actually very angry with what's going on in the industry right now. It's just a shame at the beginning of his interview, he kept that, oh, he only said it to get attention to his movies. He has got attention, James. The Irishman was very successful. The Irishman would have been successful whether or not he spoke about Marvel. Maybe he did it to get more attention, to get the Marvel audience to watch his film. Maybe. But, Mr. Horowitz, asking James this question 2 years after the comments have been made was pretty despicable. You sucked in James, and he fell for it. Hook, line and sinker. So it was the US premiere of The Suicide Squad the night before last, which means all the journalists were able to put the microphone in the faces of people that normally don't speak, and Sarnoff, but especially Walter Hamada. Walter Hamada has said that James Gunn is welcome back to the DCEU at any time, and there are more projects planned with Walter Hamada, the DCEU, and James Gunn. Now, this is something I said to you for a very, very long time. So I think there's going to be more I wouldn't expect him maybe to do another Suicide Squad movie. Maybe he'll do Suicide Squad spin-offs for HBO Max first off. I also think he will do a kind of Gotham City Sirens with Margot Robbie. She may get the opportunity to direct that while he writes that, so I wouldn't panic too much. She's only going to direct it. There'll be some virtue signalling. As long as it's a good movie, I couldn't give a shit. Right. Now, I also think he's going to do something unrelated. Now, I don't know what that is, and I mean unrelated to the Suicide Squad. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. It could be anything. I'd like to know what you think this project he's been hinting about. He said we will never guess what he's doing. I think it's interesting because people always say, his best strengths are dealing with groups of people, making us love them, putting them together. So a lot of people are saying, well, how about the Justice League? Listen, James Gunn is about the best there is these days. Now, if you compare James Gunn to the great directors of when I grew up, he falls short, of course he does. But he knows how to entertain you. You see, James Gunn, he's been moulded and made from the entertainment that you and I grew up with. So he's the same as us. He gets to put it together. Guardians of the Galaxy is a Marvel comic combined with Star Wars, Star Trek. He puts it all together. He colours it up and makes it the fun, amazing, compelling James Gunn movies that they are. I mean, in fact, I think Guardians 2 can be compared to Empire Strikes Back and The Dark Knight. I really do. Now, although we don't get a dark cliffhanger ending, the stuff with Peter and his father, played by Kurt Russell, is fucking beautiful. And I don't mean beautiful in a rainbow sense. I mean beautiful in a darker sense. He's making kind of that middle darker movie. And that's why people didn't like it, because it did have comedy and the fun of the first film, but not so much. But telling Peter's story, because of who his father is, was brilliant. Ego the Living Planet was brought to life in a brilliant way, and he is a fucking dark character. He is an unrelenting character. He's not a nice character. He used and killed Peter's mum, that beautiful woman who loved her baby and was talking to him just before she died in the first movie. So I think that James is capable of anything. And I mean, just seeing the Suicide Squad, I really believe that. It's very, very few filmmakers who can give you comedy and darkness in the same movie. So he's really, really good. So despite all the shit about Scorsese and some of the silly stuff he says, even his tweets from the past, you shouldn't get drowned out. You shouldn't rob yourself of seeing James's content. So when I look at everything, when I look at what he could possibly do, right, this is my prediction. It's one or two things, and I've done a video about one of them already. I think Green Lantern would be perfect for James. Although it wouldn't be a group thing, I still think it would be perfect for James. James has done space before. He can do space. He can do it again. So there's that. And of course there's the Justice League. Look, I think James Gunn doing the Justice League would be perfect. I think he would make it better than the first Avengers movie that Whedon did. And I think, listen, I don't want to go against Zack Snyder's Justice League because the film's fucking amazing. It's a fucking art house fucking CBN. It's sensational, right? And I don't think anyone can deny that. But I think James Gunn can do something for the mainstream here. And that's really, really exciting. So I think he could do both. I think he could do Green Lantern and Justice League, because I wouldn't expect a Justice League film to come in the next 2 or 3 years. So I think we need a Green Lantern movie. They've already told us. I mean, I've spoken to people at The Hollywood Reporter, and I've spoken to people with Variety. I've spoken to a couple of people who have direct contact with Ann Sarnoff, and I've been told they are definitely going back to the drawing board to do a Green Lantern core movie, and I believe that's James Gunn. So I think he's got a lot to do. He's going to be Mr. Central DC now, because despite the projections of 30 million, I think it's going to do more than that. So let's look at James Gunn's The Suicide Squad opening box office. A lot of people saying 30, maybe 35 million, maybe 40. I think, look, I'll tell you where these projections are coming from. They're coming from Warner Brothers. They're doing this on purpose so they can say, oh my God, this movie made more than we thought, right? Because they know this movie probably isn't going to come in at 100 million, right? I don't think you know, theatrical has kind of reset itself since COVID yet. But I do see this film making at least 45 million. I think now, it could exceed that. It depends on the weekend and how people, are looking at the buzz and everything. But it could jump from 45 million to 70 million. Now, how that works is you get people who have pre-bought tickets, but not everyone pre-buys tickets. What we call walk-ins. I used to manage a place called Quasar many years ago, till my dreams came true of acting and directing and all of that. But yeah, I used to manage a place called Quasar Laser. So we used to have book people in to come in for the game. But we also used to have walk-ins. And I mean, yeah, walk-ins were good because the money was cash in hand, weren't it? You know what I mean, brother? Anyway, so what happens is with cinemas, it's the same. Really, it's a kind of a similar industry, really. And so what happens is you get your walk-ins. So you're going to have lots of walk-ins for this film. So they can't project the opening of this movie because not as many people as they thought have pre-bought tickets, because I think it's kind of, shall I, shan't I? It's a Suicide Squad movie, even though it's James Gunn. But I think the walk-ins will be considerable. So, yeah, my prediction is at least 40 to 45 million, but we could exceed that, going to 70 million. I'm not saying that's going to happen. So my prediction is 40 to 45 million. We will see who's right. But at the moment, in this moment in time, it's a 30 million opening domestic weekend. Now, globally, that looks like it's going to hit about 70 million. That's globally. Now, that's not huge, but I still think a 70 million opening weekend is okay. And also, I do foresee James Gunn's The Suicide Squad having a solid second, third and fourth week as well. And I think once it leaves HBO Max after 28 days, I think they leave it in theatres for a little bit longer, which will really help the movie, because it's a fucking amazing movie and it's got so much rewatchability to it. So I think from about, just over 300 million to 500 million at this moment in time, but it could get bigger. But from Walter Hamada's mouth, he's coming back to do more. So no matter how much this film does or doesn't do, James Gunn will return. The multiverse strategy and the plan Walter and Ann Sarnoff have right now, and Jim Lee, that's huge. That's huge. Nothing's going to change, and I'm very excited about this plan. The truth is that Disney's never been a place for creative integrity. It never has. Even in the old days, they were a factory making something, and the people they brought in had to make it the way Disney wanted it to be made. Nothing's changed in that kind of, in that concept, because even with the MCU, things are made how Kevin Feige wants them made. He's the man with the plan, and you've got to execute them. You can tell, listen, we've heard Chloe Zhao say that she had freedom. Yes, she had freedom to tell people where to stand or shoot something a certain way, but in terms of the story and the dialogue and the narrative, she had no freedom whatsoever. None of them do. But I think we're seeing now people coming out against Disney. I think someone else from a Disney project recently spoke out about them not making a song in a film accessible to deaf people or something like that. So I think, listen, I don't think the talent at Disney, whether it's at Marvel, Pixar, like Disney very much. I think people enjoy working with Feige. And also, right, can we stop talking about this bullshit that if Bob Iger was solely running Disney now, none of this shit would have happened with Scarlett Johansson. He has been there. He's been working with Bob Chapek all this time. He could have stopped Premier Access at any time. He could have stopped it from happening. He didn't, because he was financially going to gain from it, and they've made a lot of money. So now we're hearing that Kevin Feige's so disgusted and shocked and embarrassed, and so is Bob Iger. Word for word, this is bullshit. These are two popular figures with the public, because the public see them as the people who have given them so many good things. But Bob Iger was always also there during the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Don't forget that, and some of the odd decisions being made. So at the end of the day, Bob Iger has made mistakes as well. So please stop trying to tell me that Bob Iger's some innocent bystander. He's as responsible for the day and date premiere access on Disney Plus as Chapek is. He could have stopped this at any time. So let's stop talking bullshit. Anyway, let's go back to DC, because there's a great spanning article from Boris Kitt of The Hollywood Reporter, and he is interviewing Jim Lee and Daniel Cherry. Now, Daniel Cherry runs DC Comics from a day-to-day kind of process. He's kind of the manager of the actual comic book site. So this is very, very interesting. I've read some of this and I found it fascinating. And this is about the future of DC as a whole. DC Comics in rebuilding mode. Top execs speak out on future-proofing publishing. Chief Creative Officer Jim Lee and Senior VP and General Manager Daniel Cherry III share about the responsibility to bookshop owners' synergy with films like Suicide Squad, Warner Media ownership amid a merger, and why fewer, bigger, better is a guiding principle. Boris Kitt. Let's have a look. Almost a year ago, DC Comics, the publishing unit behind superheroes Batman, Wonder Woman and Harley Quinn. It really makes me laugh that they don't mention Superman, but they mention Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn is not bigger than Superman, and she never will be, so get over yourselves. Was hit with a brutal cut that saw 1/3 of the company ranks wiped out due to broad layoffs at its parent Warner Media. But the Burbank-based comics division, led by Chief Creative Officer and Publisher Jim Lee, has been in rebuilding mode, picking up the fallen stalactites of the Batcave and the shattered crystals of the Fortress of Solitude. Oh wow, Supes does get a mention. Also scaled down last year was DC Universe, a streaming service hopeful that morphed into a comic-only platform, even as the DC brand became more of a foundation of fledgling service HBO Max. Former Activision export exec Daniel Cherry III was hired as Senior VP and General Manager of DC Comics in September, taking on the business aspects at the company and publishing initiatives that featured a Black Batman, and a partnership with Fortnite became a chart-topping hits. Yet challenges remain amid criticism that Warner Media doesn't get the comic book publishing world. A new merger, a massive one with Discovery, is an unknown X factor and isn't expected to close until sometime in 2022. Well, 2022 isn't as far away as you think. But at the same time, DC's profile hasn't been higher. Not only is the Suicide Squad looking to be one of Warner's biggest hits of the year, though you never know with the shifting winds of the pandemic, but next year should bring up to 5 live-action movies, including a Robert Pattinson starring Batman. 2022 is our year, if you're a DC fan. Both Jim Lee and Cherry took a break from running their Arkham Asylum to speak with The Hollywood Reporter in a wide-ranging conversation. The duo were upbeat and hopeful as they buzzed about interdivisional synergy, pointing to a Suicide Squad story that promoted reading DC Comics and comic retailers. It even had an Easter egg for longtime fans. Yeah, awesome, awesome. And the company is hard at work on DC Fandom 2.0. Can't wait for that. Keeping at the forefront the idea that fandom in the 2020s is now worldwide, and that most can't make it to a convention centre even if there wasn't a worldwide pandemic, Lee notes. We have a lot of wind at our backs. Yeah, look, fandom, look, you can see it all over the world, and you can just put your device on to see it, and that's a fucking beautiful thing. So, you know, credit to WB and DC and Jim who come up with this for doing this. A year ago, things were pretty dire. How has the last year been? Lee, 2020? 2020 on all levels was a challenging year for everybody. A year out, we're in a good spot. Part of what we've done in this year was think about the infrastructure and resources we have and where we want to place our biggest bets in terms of the publishing business going forward. The world opening up a little bit. The fans responding to the content we launched early this year, Future State and Infinite Frontier, has made a big difference. Cherry, as a major player in this industry, it's really up to us to redefine what this means for the next generation of fans, to build the right type of organisation that can future-proof itself to meet that fan demand. So the changes that we are making organisationally and also with our content is so that we can evolve this industry and meet fans where they are. So what is future-proofing? Cherry. We talk a lot about the 4 R's: reach, relevance, responsibility and revenue. When we talk about revenue, it's not just to DC, it means to the comic book shops, the creators and the folks who helped build this industry. Now that's a great fucking initiative, that they seem to want to make sure that the comic book shops are making money as well. Now if you listen to the Fandom Menace, and if you listen to Mr. Neurotic, he says that DC and Marvel are trying to kill comic book shops. Now I'm not deep into the Fandom Menace, but he did have a comic book shop. So he's either shit stirring or there's an element of truth of what he has to say, and this is kind of a public relations attempt to try and thwart those kind of narratives. And now our job is that we increase the reach as far as possible, not just North America and South America, but globally. To be as relevant as possible to those fans from all walks of life. This medium is so beautiful, we all grew up loving it, and to me there needs to be pop culture conversation about this art form and these stories, and yeah, that means we have great theatrical productions, animation that engage with the fans, but we believe that the cornerstone of this entire story is the comic form and the stories we've inherited. Absolutely, I agree. And responsibility is a big one as well. We talk about being fan first. We do listen. We also listen, not just to the core, but the casual fan, and want to have product to meet them both. Brilliant. You know, he's saying the right things. And that also means responsibility to the community and the comic book shop owners. I spend time on weekends at comic book shop. That's where I grew up. And if you know anything about cultural trends, it starts with a community that is strong and rich and vibrant. And it's our job to keep it vibrant and expand it through our new channels. Mobile, digital and global are really important for the next generation of fans. There are a lot of young fans who don't have a history of going to comic book shops. So how to meet them, where they are, how do you build that bridge? It may be with content that is easiest to find, which is on their phone. What do you make of these rumours that say the higher-ups want to get rid of publishing, or they just don't get it? Lee, occasionally you will run across the article or tweet, and I have to bite my tongue to not jump into the conversations. It's the furthest thing from the truth. If anything, it's the exact opposite. The comics that we publish, the core canon we establish in comics, is driving everything that we do across DC in media. We are consistently referring to the characters as we build DC beyond the publishing world. Well said, Jim. Having publishing is vital to our future. You can't rest on our laurels, and having an influx of new voices, new characters, new points of view is vital to keeping the industry healthy and representative of current times. It's mission one for us to make sure that universe we create and champion is reflective of the fan base that loves our characters. So yes, it is the cornerstone of everything we do. Well done, Jim. Cherry, that is literally a statement in our documents. How important is the globalization strategy to DC? Lee, it's always been a priority, but more so now because our fans are everywhere. These movies and productions have taken over pop culture the world over. Yeah, we've just been discussing that, haven't we? But the focus of our universe is still very much North American centric. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done and a lot of opportunity to be diversifying, creating new concepts and characters. Working with new creators we've never worked with before, bringing in a level of authenticity in their storytelling, tapping into other world cultures and really making the universe as vibrant and relevant as it can be. It's just a huge opportunity, and we are at a juncture that we can actually make this happen. What is the future of print and future of digital at this point, Cherry? Without getting into the breakdown of numbers, I can say that the majority of this industry in the West is physical periodicals and the books in the direct market and beyond the direct market. It's a vibrant business to be had there. That is and will always be a big part of our business, and that is where the core of our community is. Good point, and it's a fact. Not just lip service, it's a fact. And the community extends digitally. People who go to those shops do engage digitally, and that digital extension of the community is something we're excited by. We can leverage the power of that community to fans across the world. When you think of digital as an extension of the passion we have to the core market, it's not a replacement of that physical book. It's a way to create an on-ramp. It's a way to accelerate fandom. How much input do you get from the heads of Warner Media? Is there a directive? How much input does someone like CEO Jason Keeler have over what you do? Lee, Jason is a fan. He's very knowledgeable about the DC universe. He will talk about the multiverse and the Earth numbers. It's great to have a leader at the job who is that supportive and real champion for DC. If anything, he wants the truest representation of the DC universe in anything that do comic books media production. It's been great to work with a leader that loves the characters, loves that brand, loves the storytelling. You know what? There's got to be a place for Jason Keeler when Discovery take over, because I think he's a pure guy. And a lot of people, Snyder fans, have got issues with him now, not all of them, but I think he's a good guy. And I think that David Zaslav definitely needs to find a place for him, and maybe he will, because I think he's a pure one. He's a good one. I don't think he's a Toby Emmerich. Let's put it that way. Cherry, I don't know if you were inferring to interference, but the mandate is to accelerate the fandom and share this with as many people as possible and continue to bring more people into the tent, which is about connection and representation and accessibility and having the right stories for the time. Does the potential Discovery merger change anything that you're doing? How you operate in this transitional environment, Lee? For some of us, we're used to working in that kind of environment. The bottom line is, it's a business as usual. It's business as usual. Past the initial surprise of the announcement, at the end of the day, we're still moving forward, trying to reach the goals and objectives we have for ourselves. An impending merger, in my opinion, does not materially change anything. We've had fun brainstorming King Shark Week, and what we can do, though, laughs. Comic sales have gone up during the pandemic. What did you learn from that? Yeah, it's obvious that they would go up during a pandemic, but that's good. Cherry, it was interesting to see what people would seek out. A lot of comic book shops weren't accessible or as open, and people have been discovering this content in different ways. Fans had to work a little harder to seek it out. So to your question about increase in sales, we saw that there is a fandom there, and even if it's not in their face, people will still look and find it. I also think that because of digital, there was a shareability of stories, and the case of engagement at your fingertips, something we can't ignore. That's not a pandemic shift, that's a behavioural shift. Our goal is to learn from the new normal and build the right product. We have our product team working on DC Universe Infinite. It's not just a reader, but a fan engagement platform. We can tell so many stories in the art form, in graphic novels, periodicals, you name it, but also digitally, also bite-sized social content, snackable content that get people into the funnel the easier way. You make it for fans to discover and share. The better and higher probability it is for a conversation, a conversion to something like a comic shop. Lee, in 2020 we made the decision to change distributors, and there was definitely a period where people were fearful of what was going to happen to this industry. So I want to thank the retailers and fans for standing up and supporting the industry through this crisis. We've emerged through it better and stronger than ever. Yeah, the change of those distributors was very, very controversial, and no one was happy about that. Now, I don't know enough about it to criticise the company and say you were wrong. All I know is it wasn't the nicest things to do. Our numbers are higher than expected and physical copies are doing great. Retailers are in a really strong position right now. I don't know if that's because there's no physical comic book convention to distract our readership, but look, buying really went up during the pandemic, and we saw really positive responses to editorial at the beginning of 2021, and we haven't really lost that momentum. It's exciting to see that the fans are there and readers are there supporting the industry. The Nice House on the Lake is a big success as a creator-owned book. What does that mean for creator-owned works going forward, and how do you attract talent when people could just go to independent publishers to do their creator-owned stuff and reap the rewards that way? Lee, there are a lot of options for creators these days, but not every creator wants to be the entrepreneur and handle every facet of the production. Some people find great pleasure on just focusing on what got them here to begin with, which is creating and telling stories. The thing is, Jim, if they go to you, they're going to make less money because you're going to take most of the money they would have made independently. That's the thing. So being able to partner with someone like DC that can handle the marketing and publicity, yeah, but you still take more of the money. That's the problem. And the sales and the production is a boon for people who don't want to dive in and take on every responsibility. And the fact that we are part of this giant media company offers a chance for their project to be adapted into other media. So there are big positives to partnering with DC. There is obviously, if you do a successful story with DC, then if it's successful, everyone sees it, and that's a good one for you. So it's a double-edged sword. And given our objectives and how we want to grow the business, we're still going to be doing creator-owned books, but it probably won't be on the same level that existed before. With the vertical imprint, we're picking and choosing the right projects that will make the most impact. What they decided to do and what AT&T decided to do is not make as many comics, different titles, because some of them just weren't selling and it was a waste of money. Now they're picking the ones that sell, and this is a better business initiative. Some people won't agree with that, of course. I think that is a North Star for everything that we do. We have a smaller slate, but one thing that stuck with me when Daniel came in was the idea of fewer, bigger, better. That is something we're taking to heart. With a smaller staff, we can't expect to do everything we did before. But a lot of what we did before didn't necessarily bring the greatest return exactly. So where do we place our bets? What do we need to invest in? When you create stories, how much of it is being driven by the idea of making something that can be turned into a movie or series or video game? Leo would say it falls into different categories. There is content we do in comics that is explicitly designed to be used in media. We hired a VP of editorial programming strategy, Jeffrey Kaufman, and he's been integral in sitting between my creative affairs groups and the publishing unit and helping us with the media aspirations that we have. And also you're seeing a lot of content being created with that express purpose of being used in media productions. That said, not everything falls into that bucket. Sometimes it's just a cool comic and a cool story. We go with that. At the end of the day, you just don't know what will become the big hit down the road. It's not always clean and predictable, and that's why you need a robust creative engine driving all of this. These ideas can be used tomorrow or 5 or 10 years down the line. It's part of the mission of injecting as much as cool and authentic content as possible. There's one unifying theme that is guiding us. We're creating content. That's it. And that, my friends, is the interview. And I think Jim Lee and Daniel Cherry III spoke very, very well. I think that they paint a very bright future for DC. And I read a similar interview a year ago when they were talking about letting people go and doing less kind of stories. But I think at the end of the day, you know, they're not a charity. They can't just keep on printing everything and stuff that people are not buying. So I thought that was a great point by Jim. I think their books are selling really well. I think DC are at the forefront, not only in comics, but in television, gaming, documentaries and everything. Since Warner Media have taken over, since AT&T taken over, there's been a bigger ambition. And with David Zaslav and Discovery taking over Warner Brothers, you can expect a higher drive. The things that are going on now at Warner Brothers Pictures, at the comics, everywhere, will be supported by Zaslav, because this ultimately will make money. Now, just before I go today, just to say to you all that I expect James Gunn's Suicide Squad to make a lot of money. I think the fans of some fans who have seen it already have loved it. Of course, we've had some review bombing, and we know who's been doing the review bombing. That doesn't mean every Snyder fan's been review bombing. My opinion on this is I'm not going to tell you not to do it. You lose. You went to see a movie just so you could review bomb it. It's very, very sad, and you know the loser really is you, because we're all celebrating the future of DC content in the comic books, animation, TV and movies, but celebrating what Zack Snyder did, and who knows what the future holds. He may do more DC content in the future, but attacking, bullying and review bombing a director's work isn't in the name of Zack Snyder. It's in the name of hooliganism and short thinking. I will be back in the next video. This has been the Movies TV Mad Daily, Thursday's edition of the Movies TV Mad Daily. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. I got that one wrong, didn't I? I normally say it so perfectly. It's been a long video, hasn't it? I will see you in the next one. Remember, if you're into DC headlines, if you want to know about movies, if you want to know the breaking news, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell. And I did hear something from my sources yesterday that J.J. Abrams is definitely going to write and direct a Superman film of his own. I will have more of that as DC fandom approaches, because I think that's where it's going to be announced. J.J. Abrams came into Warner Brothers for this specific reason. He didn't come just to do Justice League Dark characters. He didn't come in just to produce a black Superman movie. He came in to craft and mould his own Superman movie. And that's exactly what he's going to do. I'll see you again in the next video. Till then, goodbye.